The crystalline spires of Kethera Prime stretched toward a nebula-painted sky, their surfaces catching the light of 3 distant suns that bathed the alien station in hues of amber, rose, and burning gold. Marcus Cole pressed his palm against the cold viewport of his cell, watching cargo vessels drift between massive orbital platforms like fireflies dancing through cosmic twilight. They thought humanity would break. They were wrong. We were just getting started. Marcus was 34 years old, a xenobiologist from Earth's Northern Research Division, and he had been a prisoner of the Valdari Dominion for exactly 17 days. His reflection stared back at him from the transparent alloy, hollow cheeks, dark circles beneath tired eyes, 3 weeks of stubble covering a jaw that had forgotten how to smile. He looked nothing like the confident scientist who had volunteered for humanity's first diplomatic mission to the Outer Rim. The fear never left him now. It lived in his chest like a cold stone, growing heavier with each passing hour. He could hear the Valdari guards patrolling outside his cell, their clawed feet clicking against metal floors in rhythms that had become the soundtrack of his nightmares. They were tall creatures, nearly 8 feet of lean muscle covered in scales that shimmered between deep purple and midnight blue. Their eyes glowed with bioluminescent gold, and when they looked at Marcus, he saw nothing but contempt. His hands trembled as he pulled away from the viewport. Weak. That was what they called humans. Fragile. Primitive. The Valdari had conquered 17 star systems, absorbed dozens of species into their empire, and viewed Earth's fledgling space program as entertainment rather than achievement. Marcus had watched them laugh when he explained that humans had only discovered faster-than-light travel 8 years ago. A sharp hiss announced the opening of his cell door. Marcus turned to find Commander Vexeth standing in the threshold, her golden eyes burning with cold amusement. She was magnificent in her cruelty, armor that seemed grown from living crystal, a ceremonial blade at her hip that had tasted the blood of countless species. "The Council has made their decision, human," Vexeth said, her voice carrying harmonics that human vocal cords could never produce. "Your species will be given a choice. Surrender your homeworld for processing, or watch as we reduce your cities to ash." Marcus felt his knees weaken. Processing. He had learned what that word meant during his captivity. The Valdari did not simply conquer, they consumed. Entire populations broken down into biological resources, their genetic material harvested to strengthen the Dominion's warriors. Earth would become nothing but fuel for an empire that stretched across half the galaxy. "Why are you telling me this?" Marcus managed to ask, his voice barely above a whisper. Vexeth smiled, revealing rows of needle-sharp teeth. "Because you will be the one to deliver our terms. You will return to your planet and explain to your leaders exactly what awaits them if they resist." She stepped closer, her towering form casting Marcus in shadow. "We want them to see the fear in your eyes. We want them to understand that their brightest minds have already been broken." She was right. Marcus could feel himself breaking. Every night he dreamed of Earth, of sunlight filtering through autumn leaves, of his mother's garden, of rain pattering against his apartment window in Boston. And every morning he woke to realize that all of it might soon be gone, and there was nothing he could do to stop it. The guards escorted him through corridors that hummed with alien technology, past observation decks where other prisoners huddled in transparent cells. He saw species he recognized from the Valdari archives, the insectoid crics, their compound eyes dulled by despair, the aquatic melorans, their gills gasping in air too dry to sustain them. All of them had been proud once. All of them had believed they could resist the Dominion. Now they were ghosts wearing flesh, waiting for the final processing that would erase everything they had been. Marcus wondered if humanity would join them soon. He wondered if anyone back home would even remember his name when the end came. The fear in his chest grew heavier, and he began to question whether the species that had survived ice ages and plagues and wars could possibly endure what was coming. But somewhere beneath that fear, something else stirred. Something that refused to surrender. The diplomatic chamber was designed to intimidate. Massive columns carved from black stone rose toward a ceiling lost in shadow, each surface covered in glowing glyphs that told the history of Valdari conquest. Holographic displays flickered between the columns, showing worlds that had fallen to the Dominion, their cities burning, their populations marching into processing facilities, their civilizations erased in the span of generations. Marcus stood at the center of this gallery of horrors, surrounded by the High Council of Kethera Prime. 12 Valdari elders sat upon elevated thrones, their ancient eyes studying him with the casual interest of predators examining prey. Commander Vexeth stood beside him like a handler presenting a captured animal. "This is what humanity sends to negotiate," one of the elders rasped, his voice like grinding stone. "A creature so small it could fit in my palm." Laughter echoed through the chamber. Marcus felt heat rising to his cheeks. Shame, anger, a desperate urge to prove himself that he knew was exactly what they wanted. They were playing with him, testing his reactions, cataloging his weaknesses for future exploitation. "Humans are remarkably resilient for their size," Vexeth explained, circling Marcus like a predator stalking wounded prey. "They survive in environments that would kill species 3 times their mass. Extreme temperatures, toxic atmospheres, radiation levels that should dissolve their primitive cellular structure." She paused, golden eyes narrowing. "We have been curious about this." The elder leaned forward, curious enough to delay processing, curious enough to study. Vexeth gestured, and guards brought forward a metal case that hummed with contained energy. "We have prepared tests. If the human survives, we may find value in preserving some of their species for specialized labor. If not," she smiled, "then we will know their limits." Marcus felt his stomach drop. He had heard whispers about Valdari experiments, survivors from other species who described tortures designed to push biological systems beyond their breaking points. The Dominion didn't just conquer bodies, they mapped every pathway to suffering. "You can't do this," Marcus said, his voice cracking despite his efforts to remain calm. "I came here as a diplomat. International law." "Your laws mean nothing here," the elder interrupted. "Your species means nothing here. You are biological data waiting to be collected. Nothing more." The guards seized Marcus's arms, dragging him toward a raised platform where medical equipment waited. He struggled, but their grip was iron, their strength utterly overwhelming. Panic flooded his system, heart racing, breath coming in sharp gasps, every survival instinct screaming that he needed to escape. But there was no escape. There never had been. They strapped him to a cold metal table, and Marcus found himself staring up at crystalline lights that seemed to pulse with malevolent intelligence. Vexeth appeared in his vision, holding a device that looked like a curved blade merged with a scanner. "Your species has an unusual relationship with pain," she observed, running the device along his arm without breaking skin. "Other primitives retreat into shock. Humans seem to adapt. We want to understand how." What followed was a blow of agony. They subjected him to electrical currents, temperature extremes, sonic frequencies that made his bones vibrate with resonance. Through it all, Marcus screamed and pleaded and begged for mercy that would never come. He felt himself fragmenting, his sense of identity dissolving into pure survival instinct. Yet even in his darkest moments, some part of him remained aware. Some part of him was watching, learning, cataloging the Valdari's methods just as they cataloged his responses. It was a tiny flame of defiance, too weak to matter, but it refused to die. When they finally released him, hours later, Marcus could barely move. But as the guards dragged his broken body back toward the cell block, he caught a glimpse of something through a passing viewport. A small vessel had docked at the station's lower ring, its hull marked with symbols he didn't recognize. Someone else was here. Someone who wasn't Valdari. Hope flickered in his chest, fragile as candlelight in a hurricane. Her name was Thessaly Vaughn, and she claimed to be an independent trader operating in neutral space. She was Calithian, a species Marcus had never encountered, with silver skin and eyes like molten copper. The Valdari tolerated her presence because she brought rare minerals they needed for their weapon systems, and because she was willing to smuggle information to their enemies for the right price. "I can get you out," she whispered during their third secret meeting in the station's lower maintenance corridors. I have contacts in the Resistance. Ships waiting in the asteroid field beyond the system's edge. But you have to trust me. Marcus wanted to trust her. God, how he wanted to believe that someone in this nightmare universe actually cared whether humanity lived or died. Thessaly spoke of rebellion growing across the Outer Rim, of species joining together to resist Valdari expansion, of a coalition that needed human ingenuity to complete their plans. Why us? Marcus asked, suspicious despite his desperation. You've seen what they do to humans. We're nothing to them. Thessaly's copper eyes softened. Because you survived 17 days of Valdari interrogation without breaking. Because your species climbed out of the mud on a single planet and reached for the stars. Because the Dominion fears what they don't understand, and they don't understand humans at all. She pressed a data chip into his palm. Transmission codes. When you're ready, broadcast on this frequency. We'll come for you. Marcus clutched the chip like a lifeline. For 3 days, he carried it hidden in his cell, planning his escape, allowing himself to imagine a future where humanity wasn't simply erased from the cosmos. He began to feel something he had almost forgotten. Hope. On the 4th day, Vexeth came for him personally. Did you think we wouldn't notice? She asked, golden eyes burning with cold fury. Did you think your little Calithian friend could move through my station without surveillance? Guards dragged Marcus to the same diplomatic chamber where the council had mocked him. But now the room was different. Thessaly knelt at the center, her silver skin marked with burns from Valdari restraints. And the elders watched with expressions that promised unspeakable consequences. The Calithian was a spy, Vexeth announced, circling both prisoners. She has been feeding intelligence to our enemies for years. And you, human, were going to help her escape with strategic data that could have compromised our entire sector. I didn't, Marcus started, but a guard's blow silenced him. We have decided to make an example. Vexeth drew her ceremonial blade, its edge gleaming with energy that hurt to look at. The Calithian dies first. Then the human will watch as we transmit footage of his execution to every ship in Earth system. Your species will see exactly what happens to those who resist the Dominion. Thessaly met Marcus's eyes. There was no accusation in her gaze, only sorrow and strange, sad acceptance. I'm sorry, she whispered. I thought I could save you. The blade fell. Marcus screamed, and something inside him shattered completely. Every hope, every dream of rescue, every belief that the universe contained anything but cruelty. All of it collapsed into a void of pure despair. He fell to his knees, unable to look away from the spreading pool of silver blood, understanding with terrible clarity that he was utterly alone. The Valdari had won. Humanity would fall. And Marcus Cole would be remembered as the man who led his species to extinction. They kept him alive for the transmission. The Valdari wanted Earth to see a broken man, a symbol of everything their species would become under Dominion rule. They dressed him in prisoner's rags and positioned him before holographic cameras that would broadcast his image across light years. But first, they decided to celebrate. The diplomatic chamber filled with Valdari officers, their scales gleaming in crystalline light as they toasted another successful conquest. Marcus knelt at the center of their revelry, chains binding his wrists, cameras recording every moment of his humiliation. Commander Vexeth approached with a ceremonial goblet, her golden eyes bright with triumph. We have prepared something special for you, human. A traditional Valdari poison used in our oldest execution rituals. It will take hours to work, and every moment will be broadcast to your homeworld. They will watch you suffer. They will watch you beg. And then they will understand that resistance is futile. She pressed the goblet to his lips. The liquid inside was thick and viscous, smelling of copper and something chemical that burned his nostrils. Marcus considered refusing, a final act of defiance, but what was the point? Thessaly was dead. His mission had failed. Humanity would be conquered whether he drank or not. So he drank. The poison slid down his throat like liquid fire. He could feel it spreading through his system, alien molecules attacking his cells, his organs, his nervous system. The Valdari watched with hungry anticipation, waiting for the screaming to begin. Marcus closed his eyes. He thought of Earth, of his mother's garden in spring, of the first time he had seen the stars through a telescope and known, with absolute certainty, that humanity's destiny lay beyond the sky. He thought of every ancestor who had survived ice ages and plagues and wars, passing down genetic resilience through millennia of struggle. And then something strange happened. The burning faded. The pain receded. Marcus opened his eyes and found himself still breathing, still conscious, still alive. The Valdari's celebration had gone silent. Every officer in the chamber stared at him with expressions of disbelief. "Impossible," Vexith whispered. "That concentration would kill a Valdari elder in seconds." Marcus looked down at his hands. Traces of the poison glistened on his fingers, thick and iridescent in the chamber's light. Slowly, deliberately, he raised his hand to his mouth and licked the residue from his skin. "You know," he said, his voice steady for the first time since his capture, "my ancestors ate plants that would have poisoned most species in the galaxy. They consumed capsaicin that burned their nervous systems and called it seasoning. They developed tolerance to caffeine and alcohol and nicotine. They lived through diseases that killed 90% of their populations and passed immunity to their children." He rose to his feet, chains falling away, as his hands found unexpected strength. The guards moved toward him, but something in his eyes made them hesitate. "You think we're fragile because we're small. You think we break easily because we feel pain." Marcus smiled, and it was not a pleasant expression. "But humans don't just survive suffering. We adapt to it. We build resistance. We take the things that should destroy us, and we make them part of our strength." The medic rushed in with the antidote, standard protocol for any Valdari poisoning ceremony, a safeguard in case valuable prisoners showed unexpected reactions. But Marcus wasn't convulsing. He wasn't dying. He was standing in the center of the chamber, surrounded by enemies, looking more alive than he had in weeks. "Your poison is interesting," he continued, calmly examining his tingling fingers. "Similar to a compound found in certain earth mushrooms. Humans have been building tolerance to it for thousands of years. Your deadly concentration was about half what it would take to seriously inconvenience someone from my hometown." Commander Vexith's blade appeared in her hand. "Kill him." The guards charged. But the broadcast was still running. Every ship in Earth's system, every human watching. So what happened next? They saw Marcus Cole dodge the first strike with reflexes that shouldn't have been possible. They saw him grab a guard's arm and twist, using leverage that smaller species had been perfecting for centuries. They saw him take a blade from a falling Valdari and wield it with the desperate precision of someone who had nothing left to lose. And they saw him survive. The burning faded. The pain receded. Marcus opened his eyes and found himself still breathing, still conscious, still alive. The Valdari's celebration had gone silent. Every officer in the chamber stared at him with expressions of disbelief. "Impossible," Vexith whispered. "That concentration would kill a Valdari elder in seconds." Marcus looked down at his hands. Traces of the poison glistened on his fingers, thick and iridescent in the chamber's light. Slowly, deliberately, he raised his hand to his mouth and licked the residue from his skin. "You know," he said, his voice steady for the first time since his capture, "my ancestors ate plants that would have poisoned most species in the galaxy. They consumed capsaicin that burned their nervous systems and called it seasoning. They developed tolerance to caffeine and alcohol and nicotine. They lived through diseases that killed 90% of their populations and passed immunity to their children." He rose to his feet, chains falling away, as his hands found unexpected strength. The guards moved toward him, but something in his eyes made them hesitate. "You think we're fragile because we're small. You think we break easily because we feel pain." Marcus smiled, and it was not a pleasant expression. "But humans don't just survive suffering. We adapt to it. We build resistance. We take the things that should destroy us, and we make them part of our strength." The medic rushed in with the antidote, standard protocol for any Valdari poisoning ceremony, a safeguard in case valuable prisoners showed unexpected reactions. But Marcus wasn't convulsing. He wasn't dying. He was standing in the center of the chamber, surrounded by enemies, looking more alive than he had in weeks. "Your poison is interesting," he continued, calmly examining his tingling fingers. "Similar to a compound found in certain earth mushrooms. Humans have been building tolerance to it for thousands of years. Your deadly concentration was about half what it would take to seriously inconvenience someone from my hometown." Commander Vexitha's blade appeared in her hand. "Kill him." The guards charged. But the broadcast was still running. Every ship in Earth's system, every human watching. So what happened next? They saw Marcus Cole dodge the first strike with reflexes that shouldn't have been possible. They saw him grab a guard's arm and twist, using leverage that smaller species had been perfecting for centuries. They saw him take a blade from a falling Valdari and wield it with the desperate precision of someone who had nothing left to lose. And they saw him survive. The battle in the diplomatic chamber lasted perhaps 3 minutes, though it felt like eternity. Marcus fought with every technique humanity had developed through millennia of conflict, martial arts refined through generations, tactical thinking shaped by countless wars, the pure stubborn refusal to die that had carried his species from caves to stars. He didn't win, exactly. There were too many of them. And despite his immunity to their poison, he was still one human against dozens of trained Valdari warriors. But he survived long enough for the transmission to complete. Long enough for Earth to see that humanity could fight back. And long enough for the ships waiting in the asteroid field to receive his earlier broadcast. The resistance arrived in a blaze of weapon fire and desperate courage. Ships from a dozen species descended on Kethra Prime, their captains united by a common enemy and inspired by something they had just witnessed, a single human, broken and alone, rising to challenge an empire that had crushed thousands before him. The battle for the station lasted 6 hours. Marcus spent most of it unconscious, his body finally surrendering to exhaustion and accumulated trauma. When he woke, he found himself in a medical bay aboard a ship he didn't recognize, surrounded by species he had never seen, all of them looking at him with something that resembled awe. "You're famous now," said a Krix medic, her compound eyes reflecting his battered face. "The human who drank Valdari poison and asked for more. The Resistance has been sharing your broadcast across 100 systems. Species that were considering surrender are rising up instead." Marcus closed his eyes. He thought of Thessaly, who had died trying to save him. He thought of the prisoners still trapped on Kethra Prime, waiting for processing that might never come now that the station was under siege. He thought of Earth, watching the stars and wondering if their children would inherit a future worth living. "I didn't do anything special," he said quietly. "I just refused to give up." The medic made a sound that might have been laughter. "That's exactly what humans keep saying. And that's exactly why the Dominion is terrified of you. They conquer through fear. They break species by making them believe resistance is impossible. But you showed the entire galaxy that humans don't operate on logic. You fight even when there's no hope. You survive even when you shouldn't. You turn poison into performance." Later, Marcus would learn that his broadcast had changed everything. The Valdari's carefully constructed image of invincibility had cracked. Rebellion was spreading across the outer rim like wildfire, and humanity that had only discovered faster-than-light travel 8 years ago, had become the symbol of resistance. He stood at a viewport aboard the Resistance flagship, watching stars drift past in eternal silence. Somewhere out there, his homeworld waited. Somewhere out there, his species was preparing for a war they had never asked for but would refuse to lose. Marcus pressed his palm against the cold glass, remembering the cell on Kethra Prime where his journey had begun. He was different now, scarred and broken and rebuilt into something harder, something that could look at the endless dark and see opportunity instead of threat. The Valdari had been right about one thing: humans were remarkably resilient. They just hadn't understood what that meant. They hadn't understood that resilience wasn't about being unbreakable. It was about breaking and healing and coming back stronger. It was about taking pain and fear and despair and transforming them into fuel for survival. The first wave of human warships emerged from hyperspace, their hulls gleaming in the light of distant suns. Marcus watched them form up around the Resistance fleet, tiny vessels by galactic standards, crewed by people who had only known interstellar travel for less than a decade, facing an empire that had dominated half the galaxy. And somehow, impossibly, he knew they were going to win. Because humanity didn't just survive. Humanity adapted. Humanity evolved. Humanity looked at impossible odds and asked, why not? They thought humanity would break. They were wrong. They had no idea we were just getting started.